Hello, this is Dr. Tom Lewis with Real Health Clinics, and today I want to dive into the real causes of vascular disease, thus the real causes of Alzheimer's disease. So we understand now that both vascular disease and Alzheimer's disease are diseases of the really small vessels and capillaries in our body. Next slide, please. So as a summary, heart disease is a disease of the small vessels that support the larger vessels. It's not a buildup of plaque inside the large vessel. It's disease of the small vessel that eventually erupts into the larger vessel. And Alzheimer's is a disease of the small vessel or the capillaries, which neurologists can't see because MRI can't see down as low as a capillary. It's too small. So next slide. So we're not alone on this philosophy. The idea behind vascular disease and Alzheimer's has been around for 20 years, but a recent article in the top medical journal in the world, the New England Journal of Medicine, switched it around a little bit. They're calling heart disease Alzheimer's disease of the heart, whereas we're saying Alzheimer's is cardiovascular disease of the brain. So it goes both ways, obviously, because it's the same thing. Next slide. So one of the commonalities between most of the major chronic diseases is inflammation. What I'm saying here, and I want to make it very clear, stop blaming inflammation. Inflammation is a treasure of nature. Inflammation is fighting on our behalf. It's part of our immune response to make us well. Yes, just like in war, there might be a little collateral damage, but most of the work of inflammation is to fight something that's even underlying inflammation, and we need to get at what that is, understand it, and treat it to make both cardiovascular disease and Alzheimer's disease go away. So let's just look at the profundity, the profoundness of the connection between inflammation and infection. So if we look at all these diseases from cardiovascular disease to glaucoma and do a search in the medical library database, PubMed, and we just see how many research papers are published on these topics. So cardiovascular disease and inflammation, over 2 million. Cardiovascular disease and infection, curiously, over 2 million, almost the same amount. Cancer, inflammation, and infection, the number of separate publications or overlapping publications, pretty much the same. If we look at diabetes, Alzheimer's, pretty much the same for both these conditions. The one exception is ulcers. We know it's caused by H. pylori infection, so there's more publications on infection and ulcers than there are on inflammation. But the connection is very clear. Infection and inflammation are intimately connected, but infection is at the root, whereas inflammation is really just a symptom of disease. Next slide. So what kind of infection is causing these diseases? Well, this is a paper by Dr. McCulley at Harvard Medical School from a few years ago, and what he reported is that chlamydia pneumoniae infection is found in vascular plaque. So people with heart disease in their vessels were finding chlamydia pneumoniae infection. And if you go even further, in that same paper by McCulley, he referenced another paper where some German scientists found as many as 50 different infectious species in diseased arterial tissue, vessels, arteries, capillaries. But they found no infection, or essentially no infection, in the healthy tissue, people with no disease. And on average, if we have diseased vascular tissue, as many as 12 species. Is anybody you're going to see looking for a single species, for example? Maybe this is why we're not curing cardiovascular disease or Alzheimer's disease. So next slide. So next, I want to talk about the connection between infectious species and Alzheimer's, and I can go into a detailed review on that. But our book, The End of Alzheimer's, A Differential Diagnosis Towards a Cure, published on Amazon, in Chapter 9, we go in great detail describing the different infectious species that are associated and really at the root or cause of Alzheimer's disease. But I want to point out that even infection is not the most fundamental cause of this disease, either the vascular disease, the ulcer, or Alzheimer's disease. And in a future video, we'll get into the real true root cause. But let's summarize what we talked about today. In conclusion, Alzheimer's is a vascular disease. Heart disease is the disease of small vessels of the large vessels. Alzheimer's is also a disease of the small vessels, but the small vessels in the brain, which are capillaries. Both diseases involve inflammation. It's an inflammatory response that our body is fighting something to protect us. Infection is connected to inflammation in essentially all chronic diseases: cancer, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, you name it. Chlamydia pneumonia and spirochetes, which we discuss in Chapter 9 of our book, The End of Alzheimer's, are common in both diseases, as are many other infectious species. My name's Dr. Tom Lewis with Real Health Clinics, and I appreciate your time. Thanks very much.